Number 5. Earl Washington Jr. was convicted and sentenced to death in 1984 for the 1982 rape and murder of Rebecca Lynn Williams in Culpeper, Virginia. Washington was barely literate, with an IQ estimated at 69, classifying him as intellectually disabled. He was coerced into confessing to the crime when arrested on an unrelated charge. Recognizing Washington's mental limitations, his fellow death row inmate Joe Giarratano filed a class action lawsuit seeking to have the appropriate legal action taken on Washington's behalf. Under Virginia law, at that time the state provided an attorney for death row inmates during the mandatory appeals process, but no legal assistance was provided for habeas corpus appeals. In those cases, it was up to the prisoner to undertake the necessary research and file their own legal papers. Giarratano understood this was unjust and pursued a civil lawsuit against the state, citing a deprivation of federal constitutional rights. He contacted Marie Deans, a volunteer advocate, who enlisted pro bono help. Washington's defense attorneys gained approval in 1993 to conduct a DNA analysis of the crime scene evidence. This showed that Washington couldn't have made an incriminating semen stain and raised doubts about the case. The appeals court refused to hear it because of Virginia's severe limitations on when new evidence can be introduced post-conviction. In 1985, 9 days before Washington's rescheduled execution, Virginia's Governor Douglas Wilder commuted his sentence to life in prison. In 2000, after more accurate DNA testing connected another man to the crime, Washington received a full pardon from Governor James Gilmore. Since Washington's exoneration, the United States Supreme Court has ruled in Atkins v. Virginia 2002 that the death penalty for people with intellectual disabilities is unconstitutional. Number 4. Anthony Porter was sentenced to death in Chicago, Illinois, and served 17 years on death row. On August 15, 1982, teenage couple Jerry Hillard and Marilyn Green were shot to death at a pool in Washington Park. The assailant stole Green's money and jewelry. Police focused on Porter as the primary suspect in the shootings. Porter had a prior record of a robbery at the same location and ties to gangs in that area. After hearing he was connected to the shootings, Porter went to the police station to clear his name. There, he was arrested. Chicago police questioned William Taylor, who was swimming in the pool at the time. Taylor initially said he didn't see the shooter, but later claimed he saw Anthony Porter run by after hearing shots. After 17 more hours of interrogation, Taylor's story evolved into a statement that he saw Porter shoot the victims. In September 1983, Porter went on trial in Cook County Circuit Court. The judge had to wake up Porter's attorney, who fell asleep during the trial. After 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Porter guilty of 2 counts of murder. Porter came within 50 hours of execution in 1998 and received a stay of execution after his lawyers raised doubts about his mental competence. In 1999, a journalism class at Northwestern University investigated his case, leading to his exoneration. Taylor recanted his confession in 1998, and the Northwestern investigation pursued Alstory Simon, who confessed and was charged with the murders. Simon was sentenced to 37 years in prison. However, he later recanted the confession, claiming he was promised a short sentence and a movie deal if he confessed. In 2011, Northwestern University placed the leader of the investigation class, Professor David Protess, on leave after finding he deliberately falsified evidence in a different wrongful conviction case. He resigned and became head of the Chicago Innocence Project in 2014. Simon was released from prison in October 2014. The murders remain unsolved. In 2011, Governor Pat Quinn abolished the death penalty in the state. Porter died on June 25, 2021 of a likely drug overdose. Number 3. Joseph Shabaka Green Brown was on death row for 14 years. Mrs. Barksdale, a mother of 5, was found nude and shot dead at the children's clothing store she owned on July 7, 1973. Her husband, the true perpetrator, was considered the prime suspect for 5 days before he passed a lie detector test, and attention shifted to Joseph Brown. Brown, who was 23 at the time, had confessed to a motel robbery where he sexually abused a female guest near Tampa Airport on the same day. On July 3, 1974, after a 5-day trial, Brown was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, and robbery. He was scheduled to be put to death in Florida on October 17, 1983, but a federal judge ordered a stay 15 hours before he was to be executed. Brown was released after an appeals court found that the prosecution allowed testimony at trial that it knew to be false. The court ordered a new trial, but the prosecution concluded it lacked evidence to prove the original murder charge and dropped all charges against Brown. Brown was released on March 5, 1987. In a 1997 interview, Brown said, "Overall, it took me almost 5 years to decompress from the experience on death row. Some people couldn't believe I was still alive." Brown was released without compensation. He went on to work with death penalty opponents and speak out against prosecutorial misconduct. He married and spent much of his time with his wife's children and grandchildren, but he continually struggled to obtain employment because his capital conviction was not expunged from his record. In 2012, Brown's wife of 20 years, Mamie Caldwell Brown, was found murdered in their home. On September 12, 2013, Brown was convicted of this murder. He remains incarcerated at the Pamlico Correctional Institution in Bayboro, North Carolina. Number 2. Derek Jameson was on Ohio's death row for 20 years. In 1985, Jameson was in his apartment complex with 5 of his friends at the time of the murder for which he was wrongfully convicted. Yet none of these 5 friends who could attest to his alibi were brought in to testify on his behalf. When an eyewitness to the killing of the Cincinnati bartender was shown photos of suspects by police, he identified 2 men. Neither of them was Derek Jameson. This information, along with 35 pieces of evidence, was withheld from Jameson's trial. His co-defendant was promised a reduced sentence in exchange for implicating Jameson. Based on this false testimony, Jameson was convicted in 1985 and sentenced to death. He was scheduled to be executed 6 times. He stated, "I had 6 days of execution. Can you imagine? They came to my cell 6 times to ask me where did I want my body sent? And what did I want for my last meal?" The last day came just 90 minutes before Thompson was set to be executed. A federal judge ordered a new trial for Jameson in 2000 because of the key evidence withheld by prosecutors. Yet Jameson remained wrongfully incarcerated on death row for another 5 years. Finally, in February 2005, Ohio Judge Richard Niehaus dismissed all charges against Jameson. 3 years after his conviction was overturned, Jameson stated, "I got sentenced to die October 25th of 1985, and that became the worst day of my life. I walked out death row October 25th, 2005. So, the worst day of my life also became the best day of my life." Number 1. John Thompson spent 18 years in prison for a murder and robbery he didn't commit, 14 of them on death row in solitary confinement in Angola Prison in Louisiana. Before Angola became the nation's largest prison, it was an 8,000-acre plantation where black people were tortured and enslaved. Thompson, who is African American, was arrested in 1985 in New Orleans for the murder of Ray Liuza, a hotel executive from a prominent family. The arrest was based on the false testimony of Kevin Freeman, who had sold the victim's ring and the gun used in the killing to Thompson, but implicated him in the murder after making a deal with the prosecution. This, coupled with an accusation that Thompson had been involved in an earlier robbery, got him a death sentence. Thompson was prosecuted by the Orleans Parish Assistant District Attorney's Office during District Attorney Harry Connick Sr.'s administration. His lead prosecutor, James Williams, had a replica electric chair on his desk and framed photographs of the men he had sent to death row on his office wall. Williams said in 2007, "There was no thrill for me unless there was a chance for the death penalty." On May 20th, 1999, Thompson was granted a stay of execution just 30 minutes before he was scheduled to be put to death. An investigator his lawyers had hired looked through the evidence one last time and found a report sent to the prosecutors 15 years prior that was suppressed by them. It refuted that Thompson's blood type matched that of the earlier robbery and included the names of witnesses and police reports that cast severe doubt on the prosecution's case. The robbery conviction was thrown out, and a retrial was ordered in the murder case. In 2003, a jury took only 35 minutes to acquit Thompson.